All right, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. The rain has come. They say we need it, so I'm supposed to be happy. I am happy. Be great if it just rained like 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. That'd be great. Hey, exciting day today. We have new communion cups. And the good thing about these is they actually open. So because of your generosity and giving, we upped the cups that we have. If the giving goes down, we're bringing the old cups back. Sorry. I'm sure I offended someone there. Whatever. All right, we are going through the Exodus. And each week I have been reading like a long section of it, and I always go, I know this is really long. This one's longer. Okay? I think this is such powerful narrative that I encourage you to read along with me. The words will be on the screen for all of the verses also that I'm reading, as opposed to just some of them that I made a mistake. Here we go. They've just crossed the Red Sea, right? They sang, they were joyful, they're like, the Lord is great, and then 3 days later, here we go. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah, which means bitter place. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. Remember that. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. There the Lord issued a ruling and instruction for them and put them to the test. He said, "If you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians." Think of the plagues. "For I am the Lord who heals you." Remember that phrase. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees. And they camped there near the water. Remember that. 12 springs, 70 palm springs. Nothing is just random in this narrative. Think of 12 and 70. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin. Vegas. Just kidding. Which is between Elim and Sinai on the 15th day. That's in the modern version of the Bible. There you go. Which is between Elim and Sinai on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. They're referencing Sinai because that's where they're journeying to go, to worship God at Sinai. Sinai is also the mountain where Moses saw the burning bush. That was Mount Sinai. He's like, I'm sending you out, now bring the people back to this place. The Israelites said to them, in the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions," the one he just gave them. "On the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." So Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses also said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses told Aaron, "Say to the entire Israelite community, 'Come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling.'" While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, it is bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer, which is an amount for each person you have in your tent. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person, and the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, this is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to, and bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning. So they saved it until morning, as Moses commanded, and did not stink or get maggots in it. Eat it today, Moses said, because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today, because 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any. Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather it, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day, and no one is to go out. So the people rested on the 7th day. The people of Israel called the bread manna. It was like white coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so that they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt. So Moses said to Aaron, take a jar and put an omer of manna in it, then place it before the Lord to keep it for the generations to come. As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna with the tablets of the covenant law so that it might be preserved. The Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. Father, I pray as we get into this today that you would show us and teach us and prepare us. A lot of words in this narrative, but some amazing, amazing truth about you to be discovered. Help us in your name. Amen. In the movie Lion King, Rafiki looks at a broken down, frustrated Simba and says this, the past can hurt, but the way I see it, you either can run from it or you can learn from it. In other words, are you going to try and run from the pieces of your life that maybe not have gone so well, or are you going to try to get your life together? There's this time in humans' lives, whether it's an age, a stage, or a circumstance, where we push away. We test boundaries. We either are claiming our parents just don't know anything about anything, so we want to do our own thing, but since we're only 11, there's not much we can do. Or we claim authorities or pastors or people or presidents just don't understand. We become convinced that our path choice is better. And for many, we hit this time in our path, in our journey, where we push away from one place in order to find a future home that we would say is of peace. And we have a new set of desires that move in us. We want to make our own decisions. We want to be free to do what we want. We want to plan our own activities and schedules. We want to be self-reliant, independent from others. We want to explore and leave the current space that we are. And while these are all good signs of someone growing up and someone becoming independent and mature, there's something that all of us do. We create markers. We create these things that along the way we say, here are the essentials as we go towards this space. We create, whether it's in our own or have been passed down from generations before us, financial markers. How much we have, how much should I have, how much will I need? And then we make choices around this marker that we've created. Career markers, what do you do? What kind of status will that give me? And we make choices around this. Education markers, where did you go to school? Where do your kids go to school? What schools did you apply to? What do you know? The appearance of knowing. We have reputation markers. What do other people think of me? Am I about the right things socially and culturally? All these things that we create these things for ourselves. And these markers, for so many of us, become mandates. Self-mandated things that this is what life is about. These might be pressures. These might be some kind of scorecard where you're like, I'm doing the things that I have determined needs to be done. And this pushing away isn't just an adolescent thing. It is a humanity thing with their Creator. As we talked about last week, there's an initial free, but then there's a journey towards freedom. And in this journey towards freedom, we want as little friction as possible, do we not? We want these markers to make sense for us, and we don't want friction because we don't want the struggle. And as Tupac says, the struggle is real. I've always wanted to quote Tupac in a sermon. Some of you are like, who's Tupac? I don't know. Don't go home and Google Tupac and be like, our pastor loves, never mind. But this struggle that we face could also be known as the wilderness. Some call the wilderness a crisis of faith. They connect the markers of finances, career, education, reputation as a faith where God is providing. And when those are at risk, even though we're the ones who told us those are valuable, we start to have a crisis. But it's in the wilderness that the actual movement happens. And we realize that these markers and mandates that we have created aren't getting us any closer to that peace, to that home that we dreamed of. There was a time where a really, really close friend of mine and my mentor for many, many years was diagnosed with cancer, and he had a long battle, and he didn't know how much time he had. So I just, in a conversation, asked him, what kinds of things are you thinking about right now? And he said to me this, I am thinking a lot about what it means to be at peace. I am learning so much about myself and more from the Lord. He says, Dale, the things I used to worry about, I don't really worry about them anymore. And that's fascinating to me. He goes, and then let me share you this quote from this book I've been reading over and over and over. He texted me this. We can't truly be at peace as long as our hearts have not found their unity, and our hearts cannot be unified until all of our desires are subordinated to the desire to love God, to please Him, and to do His will. Now this is it. This implies a habitual determination to detach ourselves from all that is contrary to God. This is how we said it last week. God's goal is to not just get the people out of Egypt, but to get the Egypt out of the people. And that's the journey of the markers and the mandates that we have placed on ourselves as being wise. And God is trying to pull those things out of us. God is trying to detach us from the things that are contrary to him. And how does he do this? What I have discovered, he leads us into the struggle. He leads us into the wilderness. And in these places, he leads us from bondage to freedom. He leads us from anxiety to shalom. He leads us from darkness to light. And in the wilderness, he matures us. At least he desires to mature us. There's this show on Netflix. I am not suggesting you watch it. The trailer was enough for me. It's called Snowflake Mountain. If you've seen it, you're now pretending that you haven't seen it. No. Snowflake Mountain, here it is. This is an idea where they call these young adults snowflakes. And a snowflake is defined as this: a young person who is considered overly emotional, easily offended, and dramatic. Now, I don't think young people are the only ones who can be overly emotional and dramatic. So they take these 12 young people who probably have been entitled their entire life, kind of extreme, and then they match them up with these military guys to lead them into the wilderness, because as the military guy says, because the wilderness forces you to toughen up. So this show creates this scenario where you see these people, these young people who have had so much, get pulled into the wilderness. And it's entertainment. It's designed that way. It's designed for people of an older generation to go, yeah, I want these young people to get what they deserve. And we laugh, and it's probably over the top at all of these things. But the truth is, like these young people, there's none of us who like, man, I can't wait to get everything stripped from me. I can't wait to go into the wilderness, unless you've already become convinced that that's where God works. Unless we see the benefit of it. We want to avoid the wilderness at all costs. And as we've been looking at in this series, we've been looking at this simple thing: how does God work? Not when, but how. And what do we see from this narrative? We see that God works by leading people into the wilderness. I'm going to share two things with you. The first thing we see in this, and this is a truth, that in the wilderness, God heals. It is in the wilderness that God heals. Maybe it's not how we always imagine or determined it was going to happen. But in the wilderness, when your supplies have run dry, when your metaphorical picnic basket and water bottle from Egypt has finally lost all of its resources, it's in those moments. Let's go back to the narrative. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That's why it's called Marah. So the people grumbled. Grumbled. This isn't a loud grumble. This is the Hebrew word to mutter. Mutter. Mutter is that low volume complaining. You know this. It's kind of that mutter under your breath. Loud enough for somebody to hear it, but like, man, this pastor's really boring kind of thing, and seeing if someone will hear you. Right? It's kind of that, like, we try to find people. So it's a low level under your breath. It starts with one person to another. Maybe it's a question. You kind of go to someone and you're like, hey, how do you think this is going? Like maybe at a meeting at work and somebody else agrees with you. Like this, and so they go, now you're like, oh, I have another mutter with me. So you still both started. Or you make it known through body language. Maybe a rolling of the eyes. Maybe a facial expression. Maybe try to catch somebody else and you're muttering together with your expressions and you're like, muttering. There's another kind of muttering. It's kind of a passing on false information. You might say, hey, you know what I heard? I heard that Moses was actually working with Pharaoh to get us out here so that we can die. These conspiracy theories. It's the words of a cynic. It's words of no trust. It's the words that these leaders don't really know what they're doing. And here's the power of wilderness, and you add muttering in the wilderness. They get free from Egypt. Absolutely amazing. 7 days later, they cross the Red Sea. Absolutely amazing. They cross the Red Sea. They sing a song where they say, "The Lord reigns forever." And then a few days later, they're murmuring. They're muttering. And this leads us to the conclusion, or leads them to the conclusion, is if we only had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt, we would have been better. Do you see the power of the wilderness combined with muttering? But in this journey from finding a new home, we see God's ability. Don't miss this. We see God's ability to take something that is bitter and make it sweet. These are the words of like the psalmist in Psalm 30 when David said, "He turned my mourning, my weeping, into dancing." This is how God works. Let's look at it again. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. There the Lord issued a ruling and instruction for them to put them to the test. He said, if you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all of his decrees, I will not bring on you any diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. We know this. But this is the first time in Scripture this piece of God is revealed. They're learning about Yahweh. They learned something brand new about him. They're learning the name Jehovah Rapha for the very first time. They're hearing that their God does what? Heals. And God brings them to spaces where they have nothing, for the very reason that God allows them to see what's still in them. That's the toughest piece, isn't it? Like, ooh, that's still in me. You see, the wilderness is not a place that he leads you to destroy you. The wilderness is a place to heal, where we grow not in our independence, but in our dependence upon God. Kurt Thompson, in his book, The Deepest Place, writes it like this: we cannot form hope that is able to weather the storms of our lives if we are unwilling to encounter the suffering that today's culture attempts to deliver us from at all costs. His observation is that we have to face the suffering. The markers we've created is to keep it away while God is pulling you in. If anything, the wilderness is that place where that carpet is pulled out from under you. Maybe your finances don't seem to be what they were, or they're not making a difference in this case. Maybe your gifts and talents don't seem to be as strong anymore. Maybe you're like, I am the most amazing parent, and then your kid starts to rebel. Maybe your confidence is tested a little bit, or it's gone. It's in these moments where we throw out that phrase that is heard by so many people. You realize that God is all you need when God is all you got. If you've been there, people go like, I love that. Amen. But how do you realize that God is all you need when literally God is all you got? On a personal note, I can look back at my life, as all of you can, and go, here's a wilderness, here's a desert, here's some tough times in my life. And I got to a point where I was like, okay, I got it. I know how God works now. I got it dialed in. I'm good. So, like, whatever it is, like, I can make these decisions. And Lisa and I chose to move to back to a place, back to here. And I'm like, I don't have any worries. I'm dialed in. Yes, I was very prideful in my faithfulness to God, which is a weird place to be. And I remember this space where I'm like, good things are happening to me because I'm tithing. Now, this is like, I'm just being open with you as your pastor. And then there was this phase in our life, we moved back, and we were still paying mortgage on our house there, back in Maui we moved from, because it wasn't selling. and we were paying rent, and I was faithfully, Lisa and I were both faithfully tithing to our church. I will tell you that each month that went by where we paid the rent, paid the mortgage, and sent the tithe, did I become more joyful? The answer is no. I became a mutterer. I would walk from my kitchen to the mailbox making deals with God. I was a murmurer. I'm like, God, this is getting hard. Have you seen the bank account? This is getting harder and harder. Tell you what, if you don't come through, this tithe is going away. And he's like, good luck with that. You will now be in disobedience. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to pay my mortgage. Good luck with that. All these things. Month after month after month. Now, this is like a low-level wilderness. But what I discovered during that time, that even though I had other wildernesses and was still in wildernesses of my own physical health and this and that, God was not being unkind to me in that, except pulling me deeper and understanding, this is who you are. Let's do something about it. Because the kindest thing God can do is show you that. So how does God heal? Sometimes it's the physical things, yes. But more often than not, he says things like to you, my grace is sufficient. My strength is made perfect in your weakness, in your sickness, in your hardship, in your loss, in your brain. God heals your spirit, your soul, and the body in the wilderness. And secondly, real quick, in the wilderness, God feeds you. The Israelites said to them, if we only had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt, there we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us into this desert to starve the entire assembly to death. What were the Israelites doing? They were dreaming of food. There is not a chance in the world that slaves who were oppressed sat around pots of meat. It wasn't an unending, Chipotle bar. They weren't like, oh, this is beautiful. Remember that? We just had all the meat we could eat. These are words of addiction. These are words of bad habits. These are words of dreaming. It was better back then. What are you doing to me, God? It's these moments of pure dependence. Jesus says, come be my disciple. It's the same kind of transformation process. But God sets them up for all they need to grow in the wilderness. What did he provide for them? A daily rhythm, a daily bread, a daily dependence. Because it is in those toughest times of our lives where everything in us wants to push God away and make deals with God that he says, no, depend on me each day and you will see. I have led you to this place of starvation and I am showing you something about yourself and I will feed you in the midst of this. But there's one catch. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather. What are the people to do? Go out each day and gather. I think the verse is right up there behind me. Enough for the day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day they're to prepare what they bring in. So it's twice as much as they gather on the other days. The journey to freedom, my friend, here we go. The journey to freedom takes you to be an active participant. This is not, could not have God fulfilled or the whole miracle? Couldn't God have said, here's the real miracle. You'll just never be hungry again for the next 40 years. And at first they would have been like, this is amazing, we're not hungry. But then the next day, they're like, we're still not hungry. And then it's just this. But there's this piece where God says, I will provide food, but here's what I need you to do. You need to go out of your tent and go get it and bring it back. There's an active participation in how God's providing for you, having to step into what he provided. Why? Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it till morning. However, some of them paid attention to Moses. They kept part of it till morning. It was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. Why? It's to get the Egypt out of them. What was the Egypt in them? Everything about Egypt told them to store it, cling to it, hang on to it. In fact, what was the job of the Israelites as they were enslaved? What were they building, if you remember? Storages. They were building massive places for the Egyptians to store their stuff. So in them was, I need to cling, hang on to, build storehouses. Storing up is an Egypt mindset. So God's like, if you store this up, you will stop depending on me, and it will go bad. I'm getting this out of you. God's plan was participate each day with me, the beauty of the morning manna, the substance of the evening owl, quail. Do you hear me? How God provides for you in even those moments, those darkest times when life is so hard, everything in you wants to push God away to find your own way and say, you better come through for me. God's like, I am, but be with me each day. This is brilliant. At the end of Moses' life, he's looking back because 2020 with God is amazing and clear. Deuteronomy 8:2-3, Moses is writing this. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. What does that spur in your mind, that phrase? Man shall not live by bread alone. Jesus gets baptized, right? Then gets led by the Spirit to go out to the wilderness for 40 days. 40 years in the wilderness, Jesus in the 40 days for the wilderness. Satan comes up to Jesus in that time and says, the devil said to him, if you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. The direct challenge, what does Jesus say? It is written, man shall not live by bread alone. That wasn't just something that came on the top of his head. He's like, I saw my Father in heaven teach a whole population this. It remains true today. After feeding the 5,000, he's challenged by his disciples, like, what is going on? So they asked him, Jesus, what sign will you give that we may see it and believe in you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, always give us this bread. Then Jesus declared what? I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Do you see how this story in the wilderness is Jesus' story, is our story? Jesus did the same thing with his disciples. He said, hey, I got an idea. Let's all get in a boat and cross the sea. What happens in the middle of the sea? A huge storm comes up, and Jesus is asleep. It is Jesus' idea to bring you into the toughest places in your life to show you who you really are, and then says, let's do something together. And what we do is we say, this bad thing is happening to me. God, you're at fault. And it blows our minds that something so bad can happen, and I can't speak to that. What I can speak to is what he says to the people of Israel, what Jesus says to the people, and what he's saying to you today. I will bring you to a better place because I will heal you and I will feed you, but you have to get up and gather. You have to participate. As we close, for a moment, imagine with me. Let's dwell on this first stop after crossing the Red Sea. Wood was used to make what was bitter become sweet, like the work of the wooden cross that made the bitterness of sin become sweet in salvation. This first stop that the Israelites had, there was 12 springs that bring life, like the teaching of the 12 apostles, bringing the good news from the cross. And then there were 70 palm trees, like the 70 that Jesus sent out 2 by 2 to continue the message. I'm not saying these words in Exodus were super prophetic, but I'm not saying they were not super prophetic. Because here's the truth. Because of the cross, you're given life, you're given hope, you're given the gospel, you're given truth. Will you participate? For us today, God has something deeper for all of you, richer than the things that have gotten you this far. But our self-made markers and mandates keep us imprisoned. And here it is. God uses the daily rhythm with Him to heal you, to feed you, and to set you free. But you have to get out of your tent and gather. Let's pray. I have found to be true that when I'm in the wilderness, I either find others to murmur and mutter with, or I find someone to say, hey, you've been here. How do we seek God together? My encouragement for you, because there's an inevitability of the struggle, it is in that where we go, man, how do we do this together? God, what are you doing? How are you doing? In the rhythms of that. It was because of that as well, the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you're to bless the Israelites. So I bless you with this morning. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. So then they will put my name on the Israelites, and I will bless them. I will put my name on you, and I will bless you. Amen. God bless you. Be close. Consider the daily rhythm with him. Have a great day.